Okay, so the global economic waters have felt increasingly choppy lately, haven't they?
Definitely.
And a big part of that, it seems, is this recent wave of tariffs. But what's really grabbing our attention isn't just the policies themselves.
Mm.
It's how businesses are actually reacting, very tangibly. Welcome to the deep dive.
Where we dig into what's really driving these shifts.
Exactly. So today, we've gathered information on quite a few companies that have, well, adjusted their financial forecasts since about April 2nd.
Right, and it seems directly tied to these new U.S. tariffs, or at least the uncertainty swirling around them and these subsequent pauses.
And what's striking here, I think, is that we're not just talking about, cautious language or vague warnings anymore.
No, absolutely not. These are real actions. Companies revising outlooks down, delaying market guidance, which is crucial, and some are even rethinking major investment plans.
It really feels like a significant tremor, doesn't it? A direct response to this changing trade landscape.
It does. It signals something important is happening.
Yeah, it's one thing to read headlines about tariffs, quite another to see companies directly adjusting their bottom line projections, their future plans.
Exactly.
So our mission here is to sort of unpack all this information, see which sectors are feeling the heat the most, and figure out what it might mean for you.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's dive right in. We should probably start with the autos and transportation sector. It seems like they're really at the front line of these adjustments.
Oh, definitely. The auto industry, it's seen widespread revisions. Just look at Auton's Group. They're a UK-based company making auto components.
Right.
Back on April 29th, they delayed their market guidance, and they specifically said it was because of uncertainty tied to U.S. tariffs.
That's interesting. A UK company citing U.S. tariffs really highlights the global supply chain connections, doesn't it?
It really does. These policies just ripple outwards, and it's not just international firms either.
Oh.
Right here in the U.S., you've got Cummins, the big truck engine maker. They pulled their entire annual forecast on May 5th. That's a big move.
A very decisive move. And then Ford, a giant. They suspended their annual guidance the same day.
Yeah.
And they put a number on it, too.
Yeah, they estimated a $1.5 billion hit. That's just on adjusted earnings before interest and taxes, just from these levies.
Wow. That is a serious financial hit.
It absolutely is. And you see these kinds of numbers across the board in autos. It really drives home the immediate financial weight of these tariffs on, well, on global operations and profit.
And GM, General Motors, their situation is even more, maybe, complex.
A bit more nuanced, yeah. So May 1st, they cut their 2025 profit forecast.
Okay.
That was just 2 days after they'd already pulled their annual guidance. And this was despite having pretty strong quarterly results, apparently.
So things were looking good, but the outlook just getting too cloudy.
It seems that way. They apparently got some clarity on the auto tariffs, but, well, clearly not enough to stick with their original plans.
And didn't they also pause a big share buyback program?
They did, yeah. April 29th, a $2 billion program put on hold. They said they needed more clarity on the economic outlook, specifically tied to the auto tariffs.
Pausing buybacks isn't just tweaking the numbers, is it? That often signals maybe a lack of confidence, or at least a need to hold on to cash because of expected turbulence?
Precisely. Companies don't do that lightly. Suspending buybacks like that, it suggests a real shift in financial strategy, probably a much more cautious stance.
And it's not just the U.S. makers.
Not at all. Look at Mercedes, the German group. They pulled their 2025 earnings guidance, that was April 30th, right after a profit drop.
And the EV sector, the supposed growth engine.
Not immune either. Polestar, they're Swedish, but listed here in the U.S., they also paused their 2025 guidance on April 30th. Explicitly said they were anticipating tariff impact.
So it's hitting traditional, it's hitting EV, it's hitting U.S., it's hitting European makers.
It seems pretty broad within the sector. And then there's Stellantis, the French, Italian, American group, April 30th again. They suspended guidance for a moderate recovery this year. That came after a profit dip in 2024. And they also mentioned reviewing capital spending.
So potentially pulling back on investments too.
Indicating a wider rethink of their strategy because of the uncertainty.
Okay, and then Volvo cars. Their response seems particularly dramatic.
It really does. They're European, obviously highly exposed globally. They announced huge cost cuts, 18 billion Swedish crowns.
It was about
Roughly 1.9 billion US dollars. Huge cuts, plus restructuring their U.S. operations.
and pulling guidance too.
Yes, and not just for this year. They withdrew their earnings forecast for the next 2 years.
Wow. billions in cuts, restructuring 2 years of forecast gone. That really underlines how severe this is for some of these European automakers.
It absolutely does. That SEK to USD conversion really puts the scale of it into perspective.
Okay, so that's autos. Moving away from the sort of direct tariff impact on parts and cars, let's look at aerospace and defense.
Oh.
Here, the reason given seems a bit broader.
Yeah, more about general macroeconomic uncertainty, though. As you said, that often comes hand in hand with trade disputes.
Right, likely connected. So who do we have here? Alaska Air Group, based in Seattle. They pulled their full-year forecast April 23rd, cited that macroeconomic uncertainty.
And then American Airlines followed suit pretty quickly, pulled their 2025 forecast on April 24th.
And JetBlue.
JetBlue, April 29th. Same story, pulled their 2025 forecast. They specifically mentioned economic uncertainties were clouding the picture for travel demand.
It's interesting how that uncertainty then ripples into related sectors, like the airlines who depend on that broader economic activity.
Definitely. And Delta Airlines, they actually pulled their 2025 forecast even earlier, April 9th, and they were quite direct, saying travel demand had, quote, largely stalled because of tariff-fueled economic uncertainty.
So they made that link very explicitly.
They did. And Frontier Group, that's Frontier Airlines' parent, they also withdrew their full-year forecast April 11th. And they even warned about a potential first-quarter loss.
Ouch. So it's hitting their current performance too.
Seems like it. Illustrates the potential hit to the airline's financial health. And then Southwest joined the club, pulling their financial forecast on April 23rd.
Okay, so across autos, transportation, major airlines, it's just this consistent pattern. Revising guidance, abandoning it altogether. It really paints a picture of, well, an economy where predicting the future is becoming really, really difficult.
Confidence seems low, visibility poor.
Exactly. Okay, so let's shift from that broad transport impact to a sector facing maybe a more direct hit. Healthcare, specifically related to tariffs on goods from China.
Yes, Bilascura.
Yeah.
They're headquartered here in the U.S., make medical devices. They pulled their 2025 guidance back on April 8th.
And the reason?
Explicitly stated. U.S. tariffs on China.
So presumably those tariffs are hitting components they need, raising costs.
That seems the likely mechanism, impacting access to or the cost of key components for their devices, which hits profitability, which leads them to pull the forecast.
A very direct line from tariff to company action in that case. Shows how targeted tariffs can have immediate effects within specific parts of healthcare.
Precisely.
Okay, shifting again. Let's talk retail and consumers. Because this is where you start to see companies worrying about the knock-on effects, right? Higher costs for them, potentially lower demand from us.
Exactly. Anticipating those downstream consequences. Take Character Group, a British toy maker.
Right.
They abandoned their annual forecast on April 11th, said they expect the impact from tariffs on Chinese goods to really bite in the second half of 2025.
So they're looking ahead and seeing trouble. That's quite telling.
Very much so. And it's not just toys. Diageo, the big British spirits company,
Right.
they withdrew their medium-term organic sales growth forecast quite a while back, actually February 4th.
February, before these April tariffs.
Exactly. They cited a prolonged demand downturn and, importantly, tariff uncertainty, which suggests these worries were brewing well before the latest actions.
That's fascinating. So the mere threat or anticipation was enough to cause significant uncertainty even back then.
It seems so. Then you have Logitech, Swiss-American computer parts peripherals. They pulled their forecast for 2026.
2026, further out.
Yeah, on April 10th. They specifically pointed to uncertainty from trade policies. But, and this is interesting, they kept their sales forecast for 2025.
Huh. So, okay, for this year, but worried about the year after? What's the thinking there, do you suppose?
It's a really interesting distinction. It could suggest they see the immediate impact as something they can manage, maybe through inventory or existing contracts.
But the longer-term picture under these trade policies looks much riskier to them.
That seems plausible, a really important nuance there.
Okay, who else in retail?
Masco Corp, U.S. home improvement company, withdrew their annual profit forecast April 23rd. That was after they missed their Q1 sales and profit numbers.
And they blamed?
Directly attributed it to macroeconomic uncertainty coming from the tariffs.
Okay, and then Mattel, Barbie maker.
Iconic brand, yeah. They withdrew their annual financial targets on May 5th. But what's really notable is what they plan to do.
Which is?
They're planning to raise prices here in the U.S. on some products.
Oh, okay. To offset higher input costs from tariffs on their trading partners.
Exactly. So that's a very direct example of how these policies could lead to higher prices for consumers, for everyday items.
The pass-through effect.
And Skechers, the footwear company. They also withdrew their annual results forecast April 24th, and they used some pretty strong language. Yeah, they cited the current administration's, quote, erratic trade policies fueling economic uncertainty.
Erratic. Okay, that definitely signals a high level of concern in the retail world.
It does. And one more Spin Master, Canadian toy maker, withdrew their 2025 outlook on April 29th. Said they're basically waiting for things to stabilize.
So the takeaway for retail seems to be concerned about costs, yes, but also real anxiety about future demand and just general economic stability.
Yeah, it signals that potential trickle-down effect to consumers, whether through prices or just weaker overall spending.
Okay, so we've hit autos, airlines, healthcare, retail. Let's just quickly touch on a couple of others that are seeing this broader economic uncertainty.
Yeah, and it's interesting how far these ripples go. Alphawave IP Group, their British semiconductor design.
Crucial industry.
Very. On April 17th, they said they just couldn't provide any financial forecast for 2025 or beyond.
Wow.
None at all.
Nope.
Directly cited global economic uncertainty coming from U.S. tariffs. That level of sort of zero visibility long-term is a big worry in semiconductors.
Absolutely. And Avery Dennison, packaging and labeling, U.S. company.
They pulled their annual forecast April 23rd, and they're switching to just doing quarterly projections now. Again, citing macroeconomic uncertainty.
Suggests they just can't see very far ahead at all.
Very limited visibility, seems like it. And one last one. Page Group, a British recruitment firm.
Okay, staffing.
Yeah. In their quarterly statement, April 9th, they just chose not to issue a forecast. Described conditions as increasingly unpredictable.
So even affecting the labor market outlook, companies tied to general economic hiring trends.
Exactly. Shows how widespread this feeling of unpredictability is.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of companies, a lot of sectors. If we try to synthesize all this, pull it together, what are the big themes? What connections really jump out?
Well, the word you hear over and over is uncertainty. It's unambiguous. That's the common thread across every sector, every geography we looked at.
Definitely. And the timing is just undeniable, isn't it? Almost all these announcements clustered in late April, early May 2025, right after those tariff actions at the start of April.
The proximity is very telling. And you notice some companies point the finger directly at tariffs.
Right.
Others talk about broader macroeconomic uncertainty. But given the timing...
It's really hard not to see a connection, right? It feels very much like the tariffs are, at minimum, a major contributing factor to that widespread unease.
I think that's fair to say. It feels like these tariffs aren't just isolated policy moves. They're creating this ripple effect, forcing all sorts of businesses to completely reassess their financial futures.
So we're seeing this consistent story emerge.
Yeah, and the responses vary, don't they? Some are just delaying guidance, maybe hoping for clarity. Others are adjusting numbers down.
And some are taking much bigger steps, pulling multi-year forecasts, like Volvo.
Exactly, or implementing actual cost cuts, restructuring.
And like Mattel, planning price increases that could hit consumers. So real, tangible actions with potentially wider economic consequences.
Right.
Okay, so to kind of wrap up our deep dive here, it seems pretty clear these recent U.S. tariffs have kicked up a significant amount of uncertainty.
A definite wave, yeah. Rippling across many sectors, global markets.
And this uncertainty is making companies, lots of them, change their financial plans.
Yeah.
It shows this isn't just, abstract economics. It's hitting businesses in a real, measurable way right now.
Tangible impact.
So what does this mean for you listening? Well, if you're invested in these areas, obviously these changes are something to watch closely.
And even if not directly invested, as these companies adjust and potentially pass on costs like Mattel plans to,
we might start seeing shifts in the prices of goods and services that you use every day.
Which leads to a big question, really, for you to think about. How will all these corporate reactions, this widespread caution, ultimately play out? How might it affect consumer prices, the broader global economy, in the coming months, maybe even years?
Yeah. And what other signs should we be looking for? What other indicators might give us more clues about the longer-term fallout from these trade policies? Lots to consider there.